All right, welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive.
Always exciting.
It is, and today we're going pretty dark.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, this is a case that I think, we've all heard those stories about, be careful who you let into your house, and,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, make sure your doors are locked and, just be aware of your surroundings.
Right? Be street smart.
Right, exactly. And I think this one really kind of hits home on that because we're going to be looking at the life and the crimes of Robert Biehler.
Okay.
He was a serial killer who was operating in Los Angeles kind of from the 60s to the 70s. And the source material that you provided us with for this one is a Wikipedia article on him.
All right.
And it is it's pretty detailed.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm interested to get into this one.
Yeah, it should be a good one.
Yeah, so I guess, one of the places that we could start with this is, this guy, he doesn't start out as just a cold-blooded killer,
Yep.
right? There's this kind of like escalation of his crimes and the violence.
Yeah, it really paints a picture of that gradual, that descent into darkness.
Right, exactly.
From starting with just petty theft.
Right.
And then moving on to more and more serious offenses.
Right, and I think, even like his first recorded crime in 1956 really kind of shows that
Yeah.
he's only 21 at the time,
That's
right?
right. Yeah, just a young guy.
Yeah.
And already involved in a home invasion robbery.
In Pasadena?
Yeah, in Pasadena.
Yeah.
And, and two accomplices, they broke into this couple's house,
Oh, wow.
tie them up with electrical cords, gag them with tape, and get away with $1,500, which, back then was a significant amount of money.
Yeah, that's a pretty terrifying experience, I would imagine, for that couple.
Absolutely. I can't imagine being in that situation.
Yeah, and you mentioned this thing, like a descent into darkness, right?
Right.
Do you think that like this first crime was kind of a sign of things to come?
It's always difficult to say for certain with these things. But I think, sometimes early crimes can be a gateway for serial offenders.
Okay.
It's like almost like a desensitization.
Oh,
They get away with something and it becomes easier to escalate the next time.
wow. That's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's exactly what happened with Biehler because he serves, he gets caught, he serves a short sentence for this robbery, but then he gets out and gets involved in an even bigger heist.
Exactly. Yeah, he joins this burglary ring
Right.
and helps steal $10,000 from a bank in 1960.
Oh, wow.
So again, escalating the stakes.
Yeah.
And again, he gets caught and sent back to prison.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder at what point does somebody like this cross the line from just, theft to something more sinister?
It's a question that criminologists grapple with all the time.
Right.
Is there like a single moment where they, kind of snap?
Right.
Or is it just this gradual descent? How do you measure that? And unfortunately, in Biehler's case, that descent led to murder.
And his first murders are particularly brutal.
Yes, in December of 1966, he kills Julia Cook, a 38-year-old woman, and her 15-year-old son, Kenneth.
Oh my gosh.
And forces them to kneel before shooting each of them twice in the head.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah, very cold-blooded.
And he was suspected of these murders right back then.
He was, yeah.
But the police couldn't pin it on him.
They couldn't get enough evidence.
Right.
And there's a theory that Julia Cook might have known about Biehler's involvement in a prostitution ring.
Okay.
And that, he might have killed her to silence her.
So she knew too much, basically.
Right, she became a liability.
But if the police suspected him, why wasn't he arrested?
Well, sometimes you have a suspicion, but you just don't have enough evidence to actually make an arrest.
Oh, so they just had to kind of like let him go.
Right, and it's a frustrating reality for law enforcement,
Yeah.
especially when they believe that they're dealing with someone dangerous.
Yeah. And that's exactly what happens because he goes on to commit more crimes, including the murder of Michael Rodney Coveney in 1973.
Right. Coveney owed Biehler $800 for a cocaine deal.
Okay.
And Biehler lures him to a meeting, supposedly to introduce him to a supplier.
Oh.
But instead, he pulls a shotgun on him.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine what was going through Coveney's mind at that moment.
Yeah, that would be terrifying.
Yeah.
Going from, thinking you're going to get more drugs to suddenly, fearing for your life.
Right.
And the article says that Coveney pleaded for his life, but Biehler shot him anyway.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it seems like he's becoming more and more comfortable, taking a life at this point.
Right. It's that, that escalation we were talking about.
Right.
But this time he does try to hide the body.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he drives Coveney's body all the way to the Angeles National Forest
Okay.
and buries it in a shallow grave.
So he's being more careful now than he was with the Cook murders.
Right, he's trying
Cover his
to.
tracks. Wow. So it's almost like he's learning from his mistakes.
Right, becoming more calculated.
Right.
But his next crime would bring him a whole new level of notoriety.
Okay.
The infamous roller derby murder.
Oh, yeah. I've heard about this.
This is a wild one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the case of Caroli Phillips.
Okay.
And this one really does sound like something out of a movie.
Okay.
So Biehler is hired by Maida Sue Ellington,
Okay.
Phillips's roommate,
Okay.
to kill her.
Okay.
And the reason is insane.
What is it?
Phillips was threatening to expose Ellington's criminal activities.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, things have escalated quite a bit here,
Yeah.
from, home invasion robberies to now a murder for hire plot.
Wow.
Yeah. So Biehler's first attempt is in October of 1974,
Okay.
and he disguises himself as a plumber.
A plumber.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he shoots Phillips 4 times in the head.
4 times in the head.
Yeah. You would think that that would be the end of it.
Right.
But incredibly, she survived.
She survives 4 shots to the head.
I know, it's unbelievable, right?
That's crazy.
But it gets even more shocking. Ellington, instead of backing down, pays Biehler even more money to try again.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. So, she's clearly desperate to silence Phillips.
Wow, that shows a level of cold-bloodedness that's hard to even fathom.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's chilling to think about.
So what happens next? Does Biehler succeed this time?
Oh, he does on Christmas Eve, 1974.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He makes sure the job is done this time. He
Yeah.
sure shoots Phillips multiple times.
Yeah.
And there's no coming back from that.
Wow. So that's the end for her. And it's just, it all stemmed from what seems like, a roommate dispute
Right.
gone incredibly wrong.
Right. A roommate dispute with incredibly high stakes.
Yeah.
Because Ellington, as we said, she was involved in criminal activity and she
Oh.
was willing to do whatever it took to
What?
protect herself and her interests.
But it backfired on her, right?
It did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she's arrested for a conspiracy to murder in 1975.
Okay, so this is where things start to unravel for Biehler, too.
This is where the trail starts to lead back to him.
Okay.
At first, Ellington tries to claim innocence,
Right.
but, they had a lot of evidence against her.
Right.
She's eventually sentenced to life in prison, but here's the crucial part. While Biehler is visiting Ellington in prison on December 12, 1975, the police finally have enough evidence to arrest him for all 4 murders.
Wow, so they finally got him
They got him.
after all of this time.
Yeah.
What was the key piece of evidence that allowed them to make that arrest?
Remember Michael Coveney?
Yeah.
The guy who owed Biehler money?
Right.
Well, just a few days before Biehler's arrest,
Great.
Coveney's body is discovered
Oh, wow.
in that shallow grave
Okay.
in the Angeles National Forest.
So that's what did it.
That was the final piece of the puzzle.
Right.
That discovery, coupled with Ellington's testimony and other evidence they finally had enough to charge him.
Wow, so now he's facing trial for 4 murders.
That's right.
What was his defense strategy? I mean, did he maintain his innocence?
So the trial, this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Because the prosecution, they're seeking the death penalty.
Oh, wow.
And they present a very compelling case.
Right.
They had testimony from Biehler's ex-wife, Janet.
His own ex-wife testified against him.
She did.
Wow.
And her testimony was pretty damning.
What did she say?
Well, she admitted that she had lied
Oh, no.
to give Biehler an alibi for the 1966 murders
Oh, wow.
of Julia and Kenneth Cook.
So that's his alibi out the window.
Gone.
Right.
And it also confirmed the prosecution's theory that Julia Cook was killed because she knew about Biehler's involvement in that prostitution ring.
Right. So not only does his alibi fall apart, but now they've got a motive.
Right. They've got the motive and they've got the witness.
Wow. So did Biehler offer any kind of defense at all?
He tried.
Oh.
He tried to deflect blame. He even went so far as to claim that his wife was actually responsible for Coveney's death. Yeah. He said that she accidentally shot Coveney during a struggle for the shotgun.
Oh, come on.
I know it sounds pretty desperate.
Yeah, that's a hard one to believe.
Right. And the jury didn't buy it either.
Right.
After deliberating for 5 days, they found Biehler guilty on all counts.
Wow. So he's found guilty of 4 murders. What was the sentence?
Well, this is where things take a bit of a turn.
Okay.
Because even though he was found guilty of these murders, the judge was actually prevented from sentencing Biehler to death
Wait, why?
because of a landmark Supreme Court case
Okay.
that you may have heard of, Furman v. Georgia.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, so it's decided in 1972,
Right.
and it essentially declared the death penalty as it was being applied at the time unconstitutional.
Okay.
So many states, including California, they had to revise their death penalty statutes.
Oh, wow. So even though Biehler was found guilty of these brutal murders,
Hmm.
the judge's hands were tied because of this Supreme Court ruling.
Exactly. It's a really interesting legal situation.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So what happened then?
So Justice Harry V. Petrus, who was the judge presiding over the case,
Yeah.
he actually expressed frustration that he couldn't deliver what he felt was a just punishment,
Right.
given the nature of these crimes.
Right.
But he ultimately sentenced Biehler to 4 consecutive life sentences with the possibility of parole.
4 consecutive life sentences.
Yeah, so, still a very severe punishment.
Right. Even without the death penalty, that's a long time.
Right.
So after all of this, what ultimately becomes of Robert Biehler?
Well, he never got out on parole. He
Okay.
died from cancer in San Quentin State Prison in 1993.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a journey we've been on
We have
from,
here.
petty theft to cold-blooded murder.
Right.
His life just spiraled out of control.
It really shows how, escalating criminal behavior can have such devastating consequences.
Yeah,
Not only for the victims and their families, but for the perpetrator as well.
absolutely. It's a tragic story all around.
It is. And it makes you think, if the police had been able to connect Biehler to those Cook murders back in 1966,
Yeah,
could any of this have been prevented?
right.
Would Michael Coveney and Carol Phillips still be alive today?
That's a really heavy question,
It is.
and one that's often asked in cases like this.
Right. It really underscores the importance of, effective law enforcement,
Right.
but it also highlights the complexities of the criminal justice system
Right.
and, the challenges of predicting human behavior.
Absolutely. And it also reminds us that, even though we strive for, a just and safe society,
Right.
there are still people out there like Biehler who operate, outside those boundaries.
Right. People who don't play by the rules.
Right. And they often leave a trail of pain and suffering in their wake.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, this has been a fascinating,
It has.
albeit very disturbing,
Yes.
exploration into the mind of a serial killer
Right.
and, the ripple effects of his crimes.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you for guiding us through this complex case
It's been my pleasure.
and, helping to kind of shed some light on the legal and societal context that surrounded all of this.
Yeah. These cases, while challenging, they're really important to study,
Right.
to understand,
Yeah.
because, we can learn from them.
Absolutely. And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life and crimes of Robert Biehler. We know this was a heavy topic, but we hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking.
And if this case has kind of sparked your interest in true crime,
Right.
we encourage you to continue exploring. There are countless stories out there,
Yeah.
each one a window into a different aspect of the human experience.
Right.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Absolutely. So keep those brains buzzing.
Keep learning.
Stay curious, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.
It really is, and it makes you think. You know what? If the police had been able to connect Biehler to the Cook murders back in '66,
Yeah.
could any of this have been prevented? Right? Would Michael Coveney and Carol Phillips still be alive?
Right.
It's
It's a tough question.
a question that we ask a lot in these kinds of cases.
Yeah. And there's really no way to know.
No, but it really does make you think about, the importance of law enforcement and,
Right.
making those connections early on
Right.
and how much of this could have been prevented.
Right. And it also highlights, I think, the fact that, even though we have laws,
Yeah.
even though we have a justice system,
Yeah.
we can't always prevent these things from happening.
No, and there's always going to be people like Biehler out there
Mhm.
who are going to operate outside of, the bounds of acceptable behavior.
Right. And unfortunately, it's often the innocent who pay the price.
Yeah, that's the tragedy of it all.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fascinating
That has.
deep dive.
Yeah,
Obviously a disturbing one,
right.
but really fascinating to kind of get into the mind of a serial killer like this.
Yeah, I think, it's important to understand these cases,
Right. Yeah.
even though they're difficult to to stomach sometimes.
Right. And I think,
Oh.
you've done a great job of kind of walking us through this,
Oh, well, thank you.
and helping us to understand not only the case itself,
Right.
but also the legal and societal context.
Yeah, the context is important. You can't really understand the case without understanding the context.
Absolutely. Well, to our listener, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the life and crimes of Robert Biehler.
Yes, thank you for listening.
We know it was a heavy topic,
Yeah, a bit of a dark one.
but we hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking.
Yeah, and if you're interested in learning more about true crime,
Right.
there are so many resources available online,
Yeah.
books, documentaries, podcasts, you name it.
Yeah. So keep those brains buzzing.
Keep learning, keep exploring.
Stay curious, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.